backbone of Amazon. They are the reason why Amazon took the lead. It's not the website, it's not the front end, it's the back end. It's their massive, massive fulfillment centers that are oftentimes the size of, 5 football fields and can have 3,000 to 5,000 employees in one fulfillment center. They are, there's a sort of a mix of humans and robots inside the fulfillment centers, and obviously you've probably all seen the packages running down the lines and the crazy inside the fulfillment centers. But the workers work extremely long hours and extremely stressful on the physical body jobs. There's even been reports of the calories expended being actually unlawful in some countries, like too many calories to sort of be healthy. So they run to pick a package. It's pick and pack, as Tim actually called out, fungible units of pick and pack potential. The workers are picking products from the shelves and then packing them into boxes, and then they go out the door, but then they get picked up by an Amazon driver, or probably first a diesel truck that takes it to the last mile driver, which then becomes a van that then comes to your doorstep. And many of these workers are contract workers or part-time workers. And so they don't have the benefits that Amazon loves to claim that this great benefits package that they give to their workers is really only true when they're speaking about the smaller number of full-time workers. That's
okay. Yeah. So what's baffling watching this, and having read a lot about it, knowing I was going to be talking to you guys this week, what's really baffling is here we have Jeff Bezos, who's the wealthiest man in the world, wealthiest person in the world, with one of the biggest company in the world that is, during the COVID-19 crisis was just going gangbusters. The stock was going up and up. And so tell us about what happened when, with the COVID-19 thing and health and workers. I understand that in New York City, at the warehouse in New York City, there were deaths. There were people who were told not to report. Managers told them just not to tell people that they tested positive. Tell us more about all this, Maren.
So Amazon has, I would say, really failed horribly in protecting their workers, despite the fact that they are using their huge PR megaphone to try to convince the world that they're doing an absolutely fantastic job. New protocols are difficult to roll out to massive warehouses, not under the duress of a pandemic. But under the duress of a pandemic, given that they know how difficult this is to roll out new safety procedures in order to keep everybody safe, the fact that they instead decided to keep production running at full throttle and keep the warehouses packed with workers, they didn't really come forward proactively with any real substantial safety measures until they were pressured by workers standing up, speaking up, walking out, ultimately getting fired. So they really were putting profit ahead of people. There's just, I can't think of a way to explain why they didn't, knowing that it was going to be hard to really get safety procedures rolled out, knowing that testing wasn't even available. There was a shortage of masks. How can you expect to keep production running full throttle and keep shipping non-essential items and at the same time keep workers truly safe. There's just, it's not possible. And they knew it.
There was that really powerful magazine piece in the New York Times over the weekend about basically saying that, you know, it's sort of like we have no idea what's going on behind the curtain at Amazon. And that what was going on was a kind of a breakdown in the whole system, that it just, they had been preparing for a long time for just this eventuality when retail wouldn't, you know, storefront retail would no longer be a thing, and that Amazon would be the whole thing. And just at the time when people were buying more, wanting more, the system broke down. Why do you think that was? And I also just want to, if you can, segue from that into what really resulted in your firing after 14 years?
15 years, yeah.
15 years as a
Yep.
tech designer.
You know, why it failed, I think that's a really interesting question. I know that Jeff, you know, it was always his intention to have this sort of bulletproof supply chain that could weather any type of whether it was a pandemic or a, you know, a natural disaster or whatever, you know, that was the goal. And I don't know. Maybe Tim will have an answer to that. The reason I got fired was because I spoke up for workers' safety in the warehouses in the time of COVID, and I was warned previously in the prior October, last October, for speaking to the press about Amazon's business with oil and gas companies and writing custom software, you know, AWS, writing artificial intelligence and software to help them extract oil more quickly, more efficiently, you know, which is completely incommensurate with being a climate leader. So I had been warned for that. And then they would say that I was fired because I broke the no solicitation policy in the following March by forwarding a petition for workers' rights. However, in safety. However, I forwarded that email that had the petition on March 27th, and I wasn't fired until April 11th, 2 hours after our group, Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, sent out an invitation to a conversation between tech workers and warehouse workers, because warehouse workers had been contacting us and telling us how scared they were and how they felt like they were risking their lives and their families' lives every day going to work, and they didn't have the safety protections that they needed. And we said, we will stand with you. We will absolutely stand with you as coworkers, as humans, as fellow human beings. And so we want, and what we were hearing was so dramatically different from what we were hearing from the Amazon, you know, PR machine. And so we thought, wouldn't tech workers maybe want to hear a counterpoint? You know, we're not claiming we are an investigative journalist. We're not saying we did an exhaustive, you know, search to get quotes or hear stories from, you know, every single warehouse worker. We're just saying, here's a whole bunch of stories that aren't being heard at all. So maybe we would want those two groups to connect. And within 2 hours of that invite going out, Emily Cunningham and I were both fired, and the invite was deleted from everybody's calendars and the email was deleted from everybody's inboxes. So Amazon clearly, desperately did not want that conversation to happen.
Let me point out at this point that this invitation went out on a Friday and the event was scheduled for the following Thursday. And had the company objected to the event or to the attendance, maybe they didn't want Naomi Klein there, maybe they wanted to have one of their own representatives there. There was plenty of time to reach out to the organizers of the event and say, well, we object to this, or we'd like you to change something about the event. But they didn't do any of those things. They just fired everybody involved. And I think that makes it crystal clear what was going on.
Yeah, it's firing, silencing, and censorship to delete the email, which, by the way, had 1,550 accepts within the 2 hours that it was sent out. And this was Good Friday before Easter weekend and spring break for a lot of people. And, East Coast was winding down, Europe and India were, off the clock, and it still had that many accepts. So there was clearly widespread interest.
I want to get back to that question of, so you were fired, and that's been written about a lot. So I don't want to take up a lot of your time talking about that. You were fired, and Tim, you quit. You said you quit the best job. I don't remember exactly how you put it, but something to the effect of the best job you ever had. How did that come about, and why? And you were also, I should mention that you were arrested protesting the Kinder Morgan pipeline. So you're clearly a person of principle and who walks his talk. But just tell us how, Amazon's so vast and big. How do you like make a stand in that situation? And what did that led up to that?
Well, for anybody who's interested in this, I wrote a blog piece about it, and it's called Buy, Amazon, and it's widely linked and super easy to find. And it's longish, medium length, and it talks in detail about the situation and my view of it. And so if you really want to find out about it, go and read that. Obviously, for somebody like myself who thinks of themselves as a progressive, I worked for Google before I came to Amazon. And, you get a certain amount of pressure for working for Google. You get more pressure for working for Amazon because they are perceived as, part of the problem. And I was okay with that. I said, yeah, there are many aspects of modern industrial society that I'm not crazy about, but I'm still going to participate and try and be politically active. And so I was willing to go on working for big tech. But firing whistleblowers, for some reason, that just felt qualitatively different. It felt like not something that's a necessary part of being a modern big business. It just felt like stepping outside the lines of what decent human beings should do. It also felt to me egregiously stupid. Have these people never heard of the Streisand effect? It felt like, writing letters of fire 200 meters tall in the sky saying, oh, here's something we really don't want you looking at because, so please don't look here. And it struck me as a ham-handed move. And I think of Amazon as a pretty smart company that did a thing here that was malevolent and stupid, and I just couldn't go on.
Do you think that they heard you and that they acted and that had an impact that's made things better?
Well, you're never going to find out, of course. Large companies always have a message, and they tend to be very good at staying on the message. I did notice that Amazon has pushed back very hard against the proposition that they're doing anything less than perfect in the warehouse. I haven't heard a single comment on the specifics of my quitting and the firing of the whistleblowers. So they don't seem to have wanted to vigorously. I mean, there was this standard party line about no, they were fired for violating multiple internal policies. Well, yeah, sure, but nobody has tried to launch a coherent argument about why it's okay to do that. So that makes me happy. That makes me think that perhaps the people who make this kind of decision have had a chance to have second thoughts and realize that maybe this isn't the best advised course of action.
Amazon is one of the biggest carbon polluters in the world. Yet Google recently decided not to help develop AI for oil and gas companies. Yet Amazon is helping through the cloud TC, the energy company that is building Keystone XL, develop their business. These companies are so entwined. Like, tell us about Amazon and climate change, because we have Jeff Bezos donating $10 billion to climate science and to combating climate change, and yet on the other hand, Well, what do you feel about the company? How do you think they're doing?
Right?
I can start. Um, I think honestly, I think Jeff had some blind spots about the climate crisis. I That's my guess, and we heard from internal channels that when we started pressuring, he did actually get more active and actually go to some of the scientists that he had on staff and say, tell me what's actually going on here. So I think he had maybe a rosier view of didn't have as much of a sense of urgency. But that said, I think he wants to believe that we can maintain the same level of production and profit and expansion and growth and have a livable planet. He wants those both things to be true, but he's counting on terraforming other planets or O'Neill colonies in space. And I don't think we have time for that. I don't think that's going to be up and running in time. I think we should probably focus on stabilizing this planet first. And I mean, he won't really be in trouble. He has his spheres, the biodomes set up, and he's
Really?
he's got his shelter ready. So I think there is a lack of there's a lack of empathy. I remember being at a leadership training early on, and we did the sort of personality profiling, and I had I had an element of empathy in my personality profile, and it was very different from what the leadership at Amazon had, and I was concerned about that. And I talked to the leader of the group, and she said, that's okay. They need to know how things land on people. Like, I think there's a lack of understanding of how this is actually landing on people. And I think that's increased since Jeff has become increasingly, the company has gotten increasingly larger and Jeff has become increasingly richer. And he used to be on the floor with employees and go to the fulfillment centers at the Christmas rush and stand shoulder to shoulder with warehouse workers. And that, that's so far in the past at this point. I think
Did
he's
you
more
guys
concerned
see
about
much? Did you see him in your last couple of years at work? Do you know him? Do you both know him?
I've met Jeff a couple of times, but not since I joined Amazon in previous lives. Amazon is so big. I mean, the scale is hard to imagine until you've been there. I was, a fairly senior employee, but I was still 4 reports from Jeff. So, he's not a day-to-day presence. Let me interject here a little bit. On the climate change issue, I think the former Trans-Canada Pipelines interaction and the oil business interaction has become something of a sideshow, simply because that industry is in the toilet and has a very questionable future. And I don't think any business that's smart at all is going to be putting any energy into trying to drum a business there, because they don't have any money at the moment and are not likely to have much for the next little while. But with a worldwide petroleum glut, a depressed economy, and increased carbon sensitivity, I have empathy for the people in the world who've been making a living in that business, but they really need to find something else to do because it doesn't have much of a future. Now, the other thing you said that I wanted to react to a bit was Amazon versus Google. And I worked at Google before I went to Amazon. I don't think about it that way. I actually don't think that we have an Amazon problem. I think Amazon is a symptom of the problem. I think that Amazon is, far from the worst. In the case where you have to have a warehouse job, there are lots worse places than Amazon to have it. I mean, you could end up in a meatpacking plant. But that doesn't mean that what's going on at Amazon is acceptable or that we should accept it. And we don't really have an Amazon problem. I think what we have is a deep societal problem with an unacceptable imbalance of power and wealth that has been building steadily since the 1970s. And if you have a society that's grown into a position where you have a regulatory framework that allows warehouse workers to be treated poorly, they will be, because if you don't, somebody else will, and they'll have a better cost basis than you will, and they'll put you out of business. And if we have a framework that allows people to waste energy and pump carbon into the atmosphere, then people will. Because if they don't, somebody else will, and we'll have, although actually it is no longer the case that you're going to save money by using dirty fuel. The renewables are now in effect cheaper. But so if there are things that are going on at places like Amazon that we dislike, and there certainly are, then I think what we need to do is to shift the regulatory framework and really address it at a societal, political level, to have a more regulatory framework that is more humane. I was talking to Christian Smalls, who was, I think, the first guy who got fired. Is that right, Maren? I think he was the first one to go. He's in Brooklyn, I think. No, he's in Staten Island. And I was talking to him, and I said, well, what do you guys need? Do you need like a really strong union? And he said, well, maybe, but what we really need is we need a works council like they have in Germany. Where in Germany, if you have any number of people, you have to have a works council with worker representation, and you have to, put work process changes through and physical plant changes and things like that. And they don't have that in Germany because they're just nicer than we are. They have that because that's the regulatory framework that they arrived at politically. And thus that empowers workers. So the problem is not an Amazon problem. The problem is a power imbalance problem. And let me say one more thing before I stop. I actually worked in the cloud computing end of the business, and everybody I worked with was a technical professional like Maren and so on. And they were treated really well. When COVID came along and people had to start working from home, everybody bent over backwards to make sure, is it working out okay for you? Do you need a better chair? Do you need a better screen? What can we do to make sure things are working? Can we schedule meetings at better times? Stuff like that. And is it because the people who managed them were nicer people somehow? I don't think so. I think it's because the technical staff have power. They're high paid. If they're not happy, they can cross the street and get another job. And I think that what we saw at Amazon, the thing that drove Maren and myself nuts and is the reason we're no longer there, is the result of a power imbalance. Who could possibly be against low prices, wide selection and fast delivery? Well, yeah, but what's the cost? And when you're computing the cost, if one of the parties in the equation has no power, then they're going to end up paying. And I think that's what's going on in the warehouses, and not just at Amazon, across the whole economy.
There are a lot of other costs as well, I would think, for businesses that have been driven out of business by Amazon, they would say.
Well, absolutely. And, the problem of, overly high concentration of the number of vendors in any sector. There are many sectors where there is an unacceptably small number of vendors, and, a free market cannot function properly in that case. It's the monopoly has all sorts of pernicious impacts on competition, on prices, on working conditions, and so on. And yeah, I believe powerfully that one of the first things one could and should do to alleviate the pain and stress in our economy is aggressive antitrust action to break up a whole bunch of big companies, notably including Amazon.
Well, one of the somebody has pushed back on my characterization in the chat that Amazon is one of the biggest carbon polluters in the world. So I want to throw that question to you guys. Would you say that it is? And I'm also curious what your thoughts are on just the environmental impact and the sustainability of the processes that, get those great things to our door. I'm sure we all love using Amazon, everybody on this call. I can't speak for everybody, I can speak for myself. It's great, it's amazing. But what is the boxes, the people, the trucks, what does that all add up to for the planet?
If you look at the top 100, if you look at the top 100, climate carbon footprint companies, they're all oil companies. So Amazon is nowhere on that list. But compared to its, peers, it has a much larger carbon footprint, obviously, because Amazon is both Google and Microsoft and Walmart. And so the carbon footprint really comes in with the huge logistics arm. I would wish that every product on Amazon had a carbon footprint rating, and customers could shop by, you know, how far is this coming from? Is the vendor that I'm buying from, do they treat their workers well? Do they use ecological packaging and practices? You know, there should be a leads standard. You know, do you have that in Canada? I'm not sure if
Yes,
that's okay. There should be the equivalent of a lead standard for buildings, but for vendors and for products, and that should be made visible. And I think that if customers knew the full price that they were actually paying, they would make different choices. And I think Amazon knows that, and I think they could actually I suggested it while I was there and got no traction. I think they don't want customers to know. But I think when customers ultimately find out, which they will, they might feel a bit duped and a bit, they might not have as much trust. And Amazon has really benefited from the customer trust it has built over all of these years. And as we all know, trust is hard to earn and easy to lose.
You know, when they announced the climate pledge and the 180-degree turn in their rhetoric about this, Jeff said one really smart thing, which he said that if we can do it, anybody can do it. And that's absolutely true, because as Maren pointed out, Amazon covers the waterfront. It's a huge logistics company, it's a huge warehousing company, and it's a huge computing company. And seriously, the techniques that Amazon uses to address, you know, the decarbonization concerns are going to be widely applicable across the economy.
I want to just understand better something you just said, Maren, that you would like to see them list on the website, as I understood you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you would like them to list the carbon cost of all the products. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, give products a carbon rating score, you know, like if this gets a 5-star, it means it's a fairly ecologically sourced and produced product that comes from relatively near your home, something like that. You know, have some sort of a standard and some sort of a rating that's easy for customers to grok.
And like telling us where the products come from, because one of the things that was kind of illuminating in the New York Times Magazine this weekend was there are kind of these production places in China. You know, there's companies that have just sprung up completely to produce stuff for Amazon, and that are tracking the algorithms and trying to figure out and trying to get themselves up high in search, and that their whole business can be ended by an algorithm shift. But you know, we may not realize how far the product's coming from.
Right, and fast fashion, as it's called, is one of the largest climate crisis contributors, and that is fast fashion. So if you're getting a shirt for $10, there's a reason. There's no free lunch, and customers think that, you know, I mean, we're not forced to assess the actual cost of these items, and if we were, we might make different choices.
So you mean we might not think about who made the item and where it came from and what the conditions were? I want to point out that
throwaway too. Sorry, it becomes throwaway. These things that you buy for $10 also don't last, and so you have to buy 10 shirts over the year instead of one shirt, and that is also part of the climate contribution. It's just the wastefulness of it.
Well, the activism by the employees at Amazon was very effective, it sounds like, in helping the company move faster on climate change. And in terms of, you know, the things a person could do in their lifetime to help in the climate struggle, it seems like you guys did one of the most profound things, which was to get $10 billion directed towards, or at least to play some role in that. How do you see that, both of you?
Well, the $10 billion is nice, but Amazon as a whole is something like a $250 billion company. And, every dollar that flows through there is carbon loaded to a greater and lesser degree. So, I only have to decrease the carbon loading of those dollars by like 10% to make that 10 billion look like small change. So yeah, the 10 billion, great. Let's not say anything bad about it. But where if we really want to move the needle, the whole economy, and Amazon being, if you see Amazon as sort of a sample of the whole economy, needs to pay attention to the carbon loading at every stage, at the manufacturing stage, at the shipping stage, at the disposal stage, and at the construction stage. I mean, constructing a warehouse itself has a huge carbon cost because there's a lot of concrete involved, and concrete has a high carbon cost. So it's not going to be trivial to assign carbon weights to things and make sure you've got it right, but it's certainly work that's worth doing, because how are we ever going to really move the needle if we don't have a good understanding of, where the problem's coming from?
Thanks, Tim. I want to ask both of you, before we move on to participant questions, where you're going to go from here. You've both done some really big work. What's next?
Maren.
Tim. I can tell you.
Well, okay. In my case, this all happened so fast that I didn't really have time to think about it. So I woke up Monday morning with a viral blog piece and no job. And that led to a whole bunch of interesting conversations. I've met a whole bunch of really interesting people. I think I've spent a lot of years increasing the share price of high-tech corporations on the West Coast, and I think I've done that enough. So I'm much more interested in engagements with nonprofits and civic organizations and things like that. Obviously, in my case, the only area where I have really, outstanding expertise is technology and computing and software and things like that. So obviously, I'd like to bring that to bear in a way that amounts to giving something back. But I haven't picked anything yet.
And for me, I will continue absolutely to work. I was a bit blindsided, but I was ready. No regrets. I stayed at Amazon as long as I could to work from within, and now I'll work from without. I unfortunately do need a salary, so I have to find something somehow to get paid. But I don't want to go back to tech and just build more products that people don't need. So I'm taking some time to consider that, and it may be something completely different.
Thank you so much, both of you. I'm sure you're going to do amazing things. I can only imagine. So now I'm going to turn to some questions from our participants. There's a number of them. Magdalene Carson asks, what can we do as a senior? It is safer at this time to have something delivered to me than to venture into stores. Can we send messages? Should we boycott? But there are overwhelmingly so many people who are not conscious that a few boycotting may be impotent. So again, what can we do?
Well, I certainly agree that, what with COVID going around, there's a strong incentive to stay home, and particularly for anybody who's got extra vulnerability. So please, nobody thinks the less of you for ordering stuff in. Having said that, there are a lot of alternatives to Amazon. I've just started getting, I still buy stuff from Amazon, but, I've started getting into the habit of, I want a pair of jeans, I want a new, USB hub for my computer or something like that. There's a lot of other places, and you know what? Sometimes the prices are better too. So I just advise getting out of the habit of just automatically going to Amazon, and when something comes up and it looks good and says suggested purchase, you just buy it. No, go take another 10 minutes and type it into a search engine and see if you can find a better deal, and let's spread our business around.
I've done the same thing. I went through methodically killing all of my Amazon subscriptions. I very intentionally got off Amazon. I'm kind of surprised I didn't do it before, because I have obviously for many years parted ways value-wise with Amazon. But I was sucked into the convenience. It is almost like an addiction, like to your cell phone or something, because it's there, and you don't even realize until it's gone how much you were relying on it, but I did resource all of the things, kind of skip the middleman, go straight to the actual manufacturer, order it from their website. And like Tim said, I've actually found things cheaper and usually free shipping. And I'm not missing it. It does cut down on that impulse buy, which why did we need that anyways?
Maybe that was part of the crazy consumption that was going on before COVID, where we just kind of felt like, I kind of felt like it really all needs to be calmed down a little bit here. Thank you for that. Ralph Martin wants to know, what policies should Canadian government put in place to be sure Amazon follows fair work practices? Tim, as a Canadian, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think to keep moving the minimum wage up would be a good start. To make it much easier to form unions would be another good thing. It's a power imbalance. All I want, what I want is one way or another to increase the power of the workers so that they will be at less of a disadvantage when it comes to negotiating. And so the obvious policies such as labor law, minimum wage, union, so on. And also, and Chris Smalls really impressed me when he brought up the notion of the German works councils. So, in Germany, these are compulsory. They have them everywhere. And, I haven't noticed that Germany is doing badly in the business world, so it's not as though having this kind of thing is going to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. So I think there's a bunch of incremental things that you could do that would simply, shift the balance of power. I also believe, now this is unfortunately something that's probably less available to us in Canada. I think that you should take the top 10 big tech companies and turn them into 40 or 50 big tech companies by splitting them up. I mean, let's look at Amazon, since that's what we're talking about. It's not obvious to me why the retail company, the manufacturing company, the voice recognition company, the cloud computing company, and the Prime Video company should be the same company. They're not particularly related to each other. And I think it's actively distorting and harmful that, for example, the excess profit thrown off by cloud computing, where I used to work, can be used to cross-subsidize, retail and its competition with local retailers, and can be cross-subsidized to, promote video in competition with indie video makers and so on and so forth. So I think that's a really unnecessary distortion in the marketplace. Now, unfortunately, since the head office is the States, we'd have to hope that the Americans would take the lead on that. But I think we should also look closely at some of the things that they're doing in Europe. Europe has, the EU in particular, has been much more aggressive at finding ways to point to the business practices of the big tech companies that they deem unacceptable and just making them stop.
France, for example, was able to shut Amazon down.
Can you tell us about that?
The French courts and the French labor unions partnered together to insist that Amazon stop shipping non-essential items during the time of COVID. Amazon protested and they lost.
They lost the appeal. Amazon is very union averse, and that's hard to be in Europe because the unions have a lot of standing. So they basically refused to talk to the union, apparently, and the union went to the court and won the court case. And so Amazon, I was quite disappointed with Amazon in this. Did Amazon say, okay, we'll just start shipping essentials like you said? No, they went to shut down all the warehouses, saying, well, we're going to take our ball and go home because you're not playing by our rules. And fortunately, after a few weeks, they talked to each other and cooler heads prevailed, and the people at the warehouses got their jobs back, and they started shipping things. And
Carolyn Adolph is a reporter from KUOW Public Radio in Seattle. She's asking to both of you, Amazon says it has already cost $4 billion to run warehouses in this pandemic. And even so, you say there's an imbalance of power that is harming these workers. So is Amazon's model simply untenable because warehouses cannot be operated equitably and for profit?
I know that the margins, especially when it comes to groceries, are razor thin. But that said, I believe there is a way to be profitable and create livable jobs. And there's a lot of smart people at Amazon. I'm not the MBA, and I'm not the person that is going to lay out that plan, but I firmly believe it is possible. When you see the profits, of course, it's paper money, but or I mean, funny money, whatever. But when Jeff himself has increased his net worth by 24 billion since January 1st, there needs to be there must be a way to figure that out.
So I think that yes, it should be possible to operate warehouses in a way that is acceptable even in the time of COVID. We're not there yet, but I think it's probably acceptable. But I think we should be honest and say, yeah, things might not be as cheap. The prices of some things might go up. I've noticed when I visit Australia, that the prices of certain things, of restaurants, of simple things like laundry and so on, are shockingly higher than we're used to in Canada and the States. And why is that? It's because they have more progressive labor laws, and some people just get paid more. And yeah, I understand that we have a poverty problem, and for some people, even small increases in prices are going to be difficult. But the solution to that isn't to drive down everybody's wages to make the prices low. The solution is to have more progressive policies that address the poverty problem directly. But yeah, it might be the case that to operate the economy on a more humane basis, it might make some things in the economy more expensive.
So I just want to be sure the question is fully answered. So do you guys think that under the current conditions, they can improve conditions for the workers and be profitable? Or if they improve workers, like if they make all of those contract workers into full-time employees with all the benefits of full-time employees, will Amazon become, it's hard to imagine, but you tell me, not profitable? Will they not be able to make a profit from that?
I think they could. I think that's what Tim is saying, those you would need to raise prices. And that's why Amazon is probably waiting for it to come via legislation where somebody's going to make them do that instead of them voluntarily doing it. Because if everybody does it and everybody has to raise their prices, then they'll be fine.
That's right. It's not just, as I said earlier, it's not just an Amazon problem. Amazon is the symptom of the problem. It's an imbalance of wealth of power across the macroeconomic structure that's the problem. And that's why to really address it, I think it's a legislative and regulatory problem, so that you don't force just one company to play nice. You impose a more ethical and humanist ethic on the whole economy.
That's why I tell people when anyone asks, what can we do? I say, get out the vote. Like in this country, the next 6 months, the most important thing anyone can be doing is get out the vote.
I couldn't agree more.
Right on, right on. Molly's son is asking, how can the tech industry and social sciences come together in supporting the environment? How can we apply our knowledge to put pressure on government policy?
Well, environmentalists like me, who have also had a career in business, tend to be very, very fond of the carbon tax as a policy, because it sets a goal. It just says, we're going to make emitting carbon expensive. We're not going to try and micromanage how you do that. We're just going to make it expensive and leave it up to the broad, creativity and skill and innovation across the whole economy to figure out how to have less carbon. Now, I think it has to be pushed a lot harder than it is now. Carbon is still woefully, egregiously underpriced. And it's important not only that the cost of emitting carbon be made higher, but that it continue to increase. And you need a policy where there's a price placed on carbon and a declared intent to crank that price up by a certain percentage every year for the foreseeable future. And somebody will figure out how to do it. People are pretty smart out there.
I think that's a
Here's
very interesting question. We should we should we should spend some time actually thinking about how we can bring the tech industry and social sciences together to put pressure on legislation. You know, that's why we need legislation, and the more pressure we can put on the legislators, and the more that they can realize that their base supports, you know, they are sometimes afraid to stick their neck out, you know, going against Amazon, for example, because they're not sure their base is behind them. And the more that we can really let them know. And there's a lot of tech workers who are very socially conscious. And so I think there's a really a potential mind meld that could happen there.
We were talking before we got on about a couple of things related to what you just said. One, that you said the representative in Seattle is very interested in this now. And then two, Tim, you were mentioning that a couple of Facebook people quit recently in protest of Facebook's policies. So kind of like a little bubbling up going on in the tech industry. Like, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, Maren and I are examples. We're not weird. I mean, we didn't stand out that much, maybe a little bit more loudmouth than average, but inside the tech workforce, in our political opinions. I spoke with Representative Jayapal, who's the Democratic Congresswoman for the 6th District, which includes Amazon headquarters, and by the way, includes a huge number of Amazon employees, also Google employees, Facebook employees, and so on, but a whole lot of high-tech employees. She's tremendously popular, you know, wins by wide margins, gets lots of money from, you know, the employees who are in her district. Having said that, you know, the leadership and management of the companies are dead set against her, you know, and they're spending, you know, tens, maybe hundreds of millions on lobbying in Washington and Ottawa and places like that, trying to resist progressive agendas, trying to resist aggressive regulation, trying to resist environmental regulation. I think that if the technical engineering demographic were to become politically engaged, the effects of that could be dramatic. These are people who are essential, absolutely essential to the success of the large tech companies, and who have lots of career opportunities. And if they're not happy where they're working, can go get another job pretty easily. And if they decided, you know, even if a moderate proportion, like 20 or 30% of them decided that, no, I'm just not going to put up with this anymore. I'm going to become, you know, a high volume activist and yell at the shareholders and yell at the management and yell at the politicians. That's something that, you know, it's not going to solve all of society's problems, but it could be a thing that moved the needle.
So do you think that might be happening, you guys? Is that what's happening? Is this the beginning?
I think Tim just outlined his new job. He's gonna
Yeah.
I think it is happening. We had connections with, you know, Microsoft and Google and Facebook. I think there is a rising tech movement and combining, you know, there's that much more pressure when all of the tech companies, all the tech workers at the various tech companies get together. That's when you really can apply pressure.
I was watching on Twitter today, there was a controversy going on at Facebook about their frankly sleazy approach to, you know, what they allow to be published and said. And somebody was yelling at them and saying, somebody who was trying to defend Facebook, saying, you're an insider of Facebook, and saying, it's time for you to do a Tim Bray. And I thought, gee, do I become a verb? That would be great.
Lois Eaton is asking, how much do you guys think Jeff is driven by the goal of becoming the first trillionaire? Has this usurped other goals, such as addressing the climate crisis?
We in our group spend a lot of time trying to psychoanalyze Jeff and just try to figure out, you know, what motivates him. And I do think there, you know, is an argument that could be made that he does seem to be becoming more motivated by sort of a celebrity status, buying the $1 billion house, David Geffen's mansion in LA, and showing up at the Oscars, and his recent divorce and, you know, repartnering all sort of point to pursuing that sort of celebrity status. So, and I think he feels pretty, there's a real arrogance there. There's an arrogance to the whole company. And I think he feels pretty immune. So I don't think he's too worried about climate, actually.
I think the problem is not just Jeff. It's, you know, having been a member of Amazon leadership, being a member of Amazon leadership is tremendously fun. It's just a great job because what the company is doing is by and large working. You know, most of the things that Amazon touches turn to gold. The company is by and large, you know, intelligently managed, and the people who work there are by and large pretty nice, and the business is growing fast, and you're actually in contact with customers' lives, and so on. And it's a fun place to work, and it's so easy to let that become all-consuming, particularly if you're in a position of, you know, being in Jeff's direct team and so on, where, you know, you're doing this, you know, your hands are doing this thing, and it's changing the world. And that can easily become so involving that you just stop paying attention to other things. In the earlier arguments, before Amazon, you know, made the big turn on environment, I was yelling at a senior VP about, you know, you got to take this seriously, and he was saying, yeah, what you say makes a point, but, you know, it's not my job. My job is here. I gotta, you know, make Amazon Web Services run more efficiently. And he was being sincere. I mean, he was so involved in doing a great job at his job, and how wonderful a result that was producing for the customers, that he just didn't feel he had time. Well, that's why telling Amazon to play nice or telling big companies to play nice isn't going to do it. That's why we need legislation and regulation to set the rules so they don't have that option of ignoring those problems.
Yep. Because they won't do it on their own. That's been made very clear.
What do you think the chances are under this current federal government that you have in the United States right now of getting those kinds of changes?
It's kind of interesting because there's such a kind of a negative relationship between Trump and Bezos, obviously, but I don't think we're going to get any regulation like that with this administration in place.
I mean, Trump, at the end of the day, you know, is an extremely repulsive human being, but he's also a fairly conventional Republican. What he actually does is lower taxes, decrease regulations, and put in conservative judges. And that is precisely a course of action that's not going to lead to an improvement in regulations. So.
I'm resisting listing the other things he does that he's done even in the last week. But I'm going to move on to a question from Molly's son. Oh, it's Molly's second question. I absolutely support your actions, and I was wondering whether you think these social and environmental changes are more effectively made within the company or from the outside.
I think there is a lot of power working from within the company if you're willing to take the risks that like Emily and I obviously risked our jobs. But the pressure was and will still be, you know, Amazon Employees for Climate Justice still exists, even though Amazon is trying to create this silencing culture of fear and hoping that we will just go away, but we're not going away. And we have people that are actually standing up and ready to take the next fall if they have to, because people are really committed to this. That said, what we need is legislation. And so again, get out the vote, and you can do that from wherever you are. So there's power both inside and out.
One last question. It's from Allison Watt. What advice would you give to other employees of similar companies who have huge trouble with emerging corporate practices?
Organize. And if you don't know how, read up. And we'll give you a crash course. You know, it's all about making connections one-on-one. It's sort of painstakingly patient, because it really is about, we would do work-ins where we would sit in the lobby of a building with a table and some materials, and just invite people to come up and ask questions about what we were doing. We all would reach out to all of our networks and have one-on-one coffees, so that you build a relationship, so that when there is a need to call on those people to say, we're going to walk out for climate, or we're going to stand up for workers' rights, you already have that personal relationship. It is surprisingly personal, and you need to organize, strengthen numbers.
And you also need to go out and become politically active. You need to vote, you need to get out the vote, you need to find out which candidates are representing the kind of policies and changes you would like to see in society. Give them some money, get out, knock on doors, become part of the political process.
You guys, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
It's been great having you. I'm going to say a few words and then I'm going to say goodbye again. But my last words are about journalism and the role it plays in society today, and how important it is, and how really all of you on the call, I'm sure a lot of you already are subscribers, but National Observer's investigative reporting really depends upon subscribers and readers and just ordinary citizens caring enough about it to fund it. So I want to encourage you to subscribe if you don't already. And I want to encourage you also to just read National Observer, share it with your friends. And once again, Tim and Maren, thank you so much for your time. Good luck with everything you're doing. You're both very inspiring, and I really appreciate talking to you today.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.